Welcome to this explainer. Imagine building a multi-billion-dollar football empire over 2 decades. A sprawling, global operation absolutely dominating the world's most popular sport. And then, imagine watching it all collapse into complete financial paralysis in just 48 hours. It's almost unthinkable, right? But that is exactly what happened to Chelsea Football Club in 2022.
To really grasp this, let's look at the precise timeline because the sheer velocity of this collapse is staggering. On March 10th, Roman Abramovich was sitting on an estimated net worth of $13 billion, with total, unquestioned control of Chelsea, the reigning world and European champions at the time. Then, March 11th, the UK government's unprecedented sanctions hit. By March 12th, absolute chaos. The club's corporate credit cards were instantly frozen. You had world-class players who suddenly didn't know if their weekly wages could even be processed. The staff were thrown into complete uncertainty. Abramovich's super yachts were aggressively targeted for seizure all over the globe, and he was banned from the UK entirely. They couldn't even sell a single match ticket. The operational lifeblood of a massive sports enterprise was literally choked off overnight. Today, we break down the financial mechanics of what happened and the hidden ownership risks it exposed.
Because Chelsea was eventually sold for an astronomical sum in a forced sale. But that brings us to the absolute biggest mystery of this entire saga. Where did the $3.1 billion actually go? Well, I'm going to give you a promise right now. And at minute 7, we reveal where the $3.1 billion sale price actually went and why Abramovich hasn't seen a penny of it. Section 1. The flashback. The bargain of the century. £140 million. Now, to understand the sheer magnitude of what was seized in 2022, we really have to jump back to 2003. In the summer of that year, Chelsea was essentially a club on its knees. They were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, completely drowning in debt from bad contracts. Legend has it that a 36-year-old Roman Abramovich flew his helicopter over Stamford Bridge, saw the potential, and just decided to buy the whole thing. He was worth a reported £7 billion at the time, which actually made him wealthier than every other English football owner put together. So he swooped in, cleared all the crippling debt, and bought total control for just £140 million. When you look at the global behemoth the club eventually became, it really was the bargain of the century. And he didn't just buy a club, he instantly shattered the established football economy. I mean, look at Chelsea's 2003 summer versus the rest of Europe. In less than 2 months, he initiated 6 weeks of pure transfer madness. Before his arrival, the maximum an English club had ever spent in a single season was around £77 million. Chelsea blew past that, spending over £30 million in a single 24-hour window. Out of the 20 most expensive players to move in Europe during that entire window, 10 headed straight for Chelsea. Actually, scratch that, it's even wilder. An astonishing 7 of the top 10 most expensive European transfers that summer were signed by Abramovich, players like Claude Makélélé and Hernan Crespo. It completely and permanently broke the football market, inflating prices overnight and writing the aggressive playbook for the modern superclub. Over his 19-year reign, this strategy just compounded. Look at this 19-year spending spree. It ballooned into a staggering €2.34 billion in total transfer spending, or about €1.33 billion net spend after player sales. He relentlessly pumped money in, transforming Chelsea into serial winners and capturing every possible domestic and European trophy. This unprecedented level of spending completely dwarfed historical league norms. It single-handedly shifted the balance of power in European football and effectively forced every other major team to go out and find their own billionaire backers just to keep up. Section 2. The pattern interrupt. Mechanics of a freeze. So fast forward back to 2022 and the music suddenly stops. We need to shift gears from sports history to the hard, unyielding legal reality of international sanctions. What actually happens mechanically when a club is frozen? Well, it introduces a crucial legal concept, the special administrator. When the UK government sanctioned Abramovich, they had a huge problem. They didn't want the club itself to liquidate. That would wipe out thousands of jobs and destroy a cultural institution. So they legally froze the club to absolutely stop the owner from profiting, but deployed a special government operating license. This allowed the core business to essentially keep the lights on, fulfilling TV contracts, paying the current staff, keeping the stadium running. But it strictly forbade generating any new revenue streams, signing new contracts, or extracting any value whatsoever for the owner. It was a suffocating financial straitjacket, basically keeping the patient alive but comatose. Under those tight, impossible constraints, the club had to be sold, and fast. The Rain Group, an American merchant bank, was brought in to manage what turned into a frantic feeding frenzy, all happening in the shadow of war. This incredibly complex process took just 89 days from start to finish. They fielded over 250 initial inquiries from global billionaires and investment funds. That was rapidly whittled down to 12 credible first-round bids. It was a desperate race against the clock because that temporary government license had a hard expiration date. If they didn't find a buyer, Chelsea faced the very real threat of administrative collapse. Section 3. The most complex sale in sports history.
What resulted from that 89-day sprint is widely considered the most complex team control transaction in sports history. The winning consortium, led by American investor Todd Boehly and Clearleg Capital, stepped up with a total acquisition cost of $5.2 billion. But here is the catch. That monumental figure is split into two very distinct buckets. And understanding this split is absolutely vital if we're going to trace where all the money went.
The real key here are the unprecedented covenants attached to this $5.2 billion deal. Because the UK government was overseeing this, they demanded ironclad legal guarantees. They needed to ensure the new owners were long-term stewards, not just private equity operators looking for a quick flip. Look at these rules. A 10-year no-sell clause. They're legally forbidden from charging management fees to the club. No taking dividends funded by debt. Strict limits on the total debt they can put on the team. And most importantly, of that $5.2 billion total, $2.2 billion is a legally binding commitment strictly earmarked for the team's foundation, the youth academy, the women's team, and rebuilding the physical stadium. This level of restriction in a major sports transaction, completely unheard of.
Section 4. Minute 7. The frozen billions reveal. Okay, we've hit minute 7. It is time to pay off that teaser. If $2.2 billion went into binding infrastructure commitments, what happened to the actual $3.1 billion purchase price for the team itself? Well, right now, today, that massive sum of money is sitting completely dead in a frozen UK escrow account. Roman Abramovich hasn't seen a single cent of the biggest football club sale in world's history. And here's why it's totally stuck. When the forced sale was originally agreed upon, the intention was for the proceeds to go to a newly created charitable foundation. But there is a massive, ongoing legal and diplomatic standoff. The funds have been sitting untouched for so long that they've accrued over £200 million just in interest. The UK government firmly insists the money must strictly go to humanitarian causes inside Ukraine. Meanwhile, Abramovich's side has reportedly argued that the funds should be spent more broadly on victims of conflict worldwide. Because neither side will budge an inch, and because international sanctions legally bind the funds in place, the billions are entirely deadlocked. It's helping no one while the geopolitical arguments drag on. This situation has sent absolute shockwaves through the global legal world. When related sanctions were challenged in the UK Supreme Court, the government's expansive power was largely upheld. But there was an incredibly rare judicial dissent from Lord Leggett. He neutrally warned that these broad, sweeping asset freezes risk normalizing guilt by association. He actually went so far as to call elements of the designation process Orwellian. That kind of high-level judicial pushback really highlights just how legally aggressive the seizure of this massive football club was.
Ultimately, the seizure of Chelsea tested international sanctions law in ways we have never seen before. It acted as a massive, glaring geopolitical warning flare for ultra-wealthy investors everywhere. The towering, complex structures of modern financial sanctions prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Western governments can, and absolutely will, step in to completely freeze a highly visible, globally beloved cultural asset if strict geopolitical red lines are crossed.
Section 5. The bust. The hidden geopolitical risk.
So what's the big takeaway here? For 2 decades, the Abramovich model was the absolute dream for sports fans. A billionaire comes in, cares only about winning, and treats the club like a passion project instead of a profit center. But 2022 exposed the immense vulnerability permanently baked into this model. The Abramovich model revealed a risk no one talked about. What happens when your owner becomes a political liability overnight? Chelsea was entirely reliant on his continuous cash injections, and when he was frozen by the government, the club nearly suffocated right alongside him.
And that leaves us with a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying question for the modern sports landscape. Look across the Premier League or any global sports franchises that rely heavily on controversial sovereign wealth funds or politically exposed billionaires. Which current club owners do you think carries similar hidden risks? Could another modern superclub face a sudden 48-hour freeze? Think about that, and let it change the way you look at the business of the beautiful game. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what's behind the numbers